My sister told the college the radio was broken. 11 households had been hearing it every Tuesday for 6 winters. Both of those things were on paper, in the same house, 4 feet apart. I learned it 19 days after my mother's funeral, from a stranger who called to ask why Grace's Tuesday signal had stopped. 7:10, 3 weeks running, dead air. He assumed I'd know why. I didn't know there was a signal. By then the equipment had been at North Shore Community College for 8 days, donated without my signature, out of an estate that hadn't closed. The college clears the stored channel memory out of any donated radio before it goes onto a student bench, which gave me a window of about 48 hours that I did not know I was standing in. Real snow was coming, and I couldn't warn a single person on that frequency, because I didn't know one name. I assumed I was untangling what my mother had done for other people. The order of that was wrong. The college found the unit that afternoon. Unopened. Nothing stripped. Nothing sold. The donation form listed a reason. Per Grace's handoff. Her Tuesday cards went back 6 winters and lined up with county road closures, 1 for 1. On the oldest one, next to my initials, somebody had written 2 words. Supply backup. The last time I saw that phrase, it was 2014, and my mother's furnace had just quit. Walt Radio was 78, and he had no interest in explaining himself to a woman he'd never met. How many people are on this list? 11. A pause on his end. More or less. Depends on the winter. Can you give me their names? That's not mine to give. He wasn't rude about it. He said it the way a man declines to open somebody else's mail. Then he asked again whether the radio was still in the house, and I understood that I'd been standing in my mother's hallway for 4 minutes without answering the only question he had called to ask. I told him I'd find out and call him back. He gave me a number and hung up before I got his last name spelled right. My mother died on the 2nd of October, at 82, in the front room of a house she had lived in for 31 years. The service was small. Dana handled the church and the food. I handled the obituary. We were polite the way people are polite when they've agreed, without agreeing out loud, to get through one Saturday. The desk was an oak library table under the north window. On it there had been a transceiver, a power supply about the size of a shoebox, a speaker on a bracket, and a hand microphone that hung from a hook screwed into the edge of the wood. The hook was still there. Dust had kept a clean rectangle where the radio sat, 22 inches by 14, and inside that rectangle the oak was a shade lighter than the wood around it. A coaxial cable came in through a panel in the window frame and ended in the air, coiled once, the connector capped. I'm 60 years old and I spent 26 of those years as an inventory supervisor for a hospital pharmacy, and I have been retired for 2 of them. My whole working life was matching what a shelf said against what a shelf held. So I want to be honest about the first thing I felt, standing there, and it was not grief. It was the flat, cold click of a count coming up short. The college property office picked up on the 4th ring. A man named Del Hallinan, who sounded like he was eating lunch and did not stop. He found it in about 90 seconds. Intake on the 16th of October. Transceiver, power supply, speaker, microphone, 2 hand-drawn antenna sketches, and a coil of feedline. Locked cage in the back of the technology building. Not surplus, not sold, not scheduled to be broken down for parts. It hasn't even been out of the box, he said. Tag still on the handle. I had not known until that second how much I'd been braced for the other answer. Then I asked him to read me the form. Donor line. The estate of Grace Chen. Signature line. Dana Chen, dated the 16th. Condition as received in the same handwriting. Non-operational. That was a lie, or it was a mistake, and I had a man's phone number in my pocket who'd been listening to that radio work 3 weeks earlier. There's one more line, Del said. Reason for transfer. Read it. Per Grace's handoff. I asked him what that meant. He said, "Ma'am, I just log what people write." I went back to the house the next morning with a legal pad and the letter naming Dana and me as co-personal representatives of the estate. Whatever was in that house belonged to both of us until a judge said otherwise, and a person doesn't need to be angry to open a drawer. I told myself that twice on the drive out. I texted my sister from the porch. At the house doing inventory. You should be here. She answered 90 minutes later. Working. Don't get rid of anything. That was the whole conversation. 6 words and 4 words. 22 years ago we shared a hotel room in Chicago and talked until the windows went gray. The house had already started doing the thing houses do. The oxygen concentrator was gone, and the corner where it had run for 5 months looked wrong without it, the carpet still dented in 4 places. Somebody, and it was not me, had washed every dish and put them away in the wrong cupboards. Her chair was pushed back against the wall to make room for people who came after the service and then went home. I made myself go room by room with the legal pad, and I wrote down a sewing machine, a chest freezer, a wedding ring, $400 in a coffee can in the pantry, and I did it in the same handwriting I used on count sheets for 26 years, because that handwriting is the only thing about me that never shakes. The desk had 3 drawers on the right side. The top one held bank calendars, not 1, not 2. 6 of them rubber-banded together, the giveaway kind with a picture of a lighthouse and the branch hours printed down the side. I opened the top one to the current year, and every Tuesday square had the same thing penciled in the corner. Save at 10. Not 7 o'clock. Not evening. Just the number, 60 and sometimes over, going back through the stack, all the way down to a calendar with a different bank's name on it. No words. Nothing to say what the number was for. The first Tuesday of every month had a second mark. 2 block letters pressed hard enough to dent the page. Bat test. She was 82 and she tested a backup battery on a schedule. The middle drawer had the cards. 2 shoeboxes of them, 3 by 5, rubber-banded into bundles with a strip of masking tape on each bundle, and on the tape a season written the way a farmer writes it. 19 to 20. 20 to 21. Straight through 6 winters. Every card was laid out the same way. Date across the top. A short weather line under it in her shorthand. Then a column down the left side of 11 marks, and beside each mark either a check, a dash, or a small circle. B4, K2, T9, R6, and 7 more, the same 11, in the same order, on every card in the box. I sat down on the floor with my back against the desk and went through 2 winters of them without moving. Here is what a person learns doing what I did for a living. Nobody keeps a list in a fixed order by accident. Alphabetical means you're filing, random means you're guessing. But an order that never changes across 6 years, that a woman writes out longhand in pencil at her kitchen desk 60 times a winter and never once shuffles, that's a route. That's the sequence you walk a shelf in, or the sequence a truck drives, and the reason you don't change it is that changing it means somebody gets skipped. 11 marks, never 12, never 10. The circles were the part I couldn't place. Checks and dashes I could imagine. A circle meant something else. That night I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and the Weather Service archive open, the free public one, and I started typing card dates into it. The third one I tried was a Tuesday in January with 2 circles on it. The county had closed 11 miles of road that afternoon and didn't reopen it until the following morning. I tried another. Advisory, another. Blowing snow, visibility under a quarter mile, travel not recommended. I stopped at 11 cards, because 11 felt like enough, and because my hands had gone cold in a warm room. Every card my mother had circled anything on was a day the roads had closed. I did not sleep much, and by 6 the next morning I had convinced myself the 11 marks were call signs. That was the theory a reasonable person starts with. Amateur radio operators have call signs. My mother had a call sign, Whiskey 8 Quebec Romeo Delta, printed on a card she kept taped inside the desk drawer because she said her own was the one thing she'd forget. 11 marks, 11 operators, a Tuesday chat with a set roster. Boring, harmless, and it would have meant Walt Radio was just a lonely old man missing his friend. The QSL binder was in the closet, on the shelf above the coats, and it weighed more than I expected. If you've never seen one, a QSL card is a postcard operators mail each other to confirm they made contact. That binder had 400 of them in plastic sleeves, and most of them were our father's. Japan. Norway. A research station in Antarctica, with a penguin drawn on it in ballpoint. He'd been dead 17 years, and his cards were still filed by year. The public license database is free, and it took me an afternoon. Anyone can look up a call sign, and I looked up everyone in the front third of that binder. 4 of my mother's 11 marks turned out to be operators. K2 matched a licensed man on the North Shore Road. T9 matched a woman with a general class ticket and a renewal date in the spring. The other 7 were not call signs. They weren't anything. There is no format in the world where B4 is a call sign. I ran them through the database anyway, the way you check a pocket you've already checked, and got nothing 11 different ways. So the list was mixed. 4 operators and 7 of something else, all sitting in the same column, all getting the same check or dash or circle every Tuesday night, which meant my mother had been keeping track of 7 people who could not talk back. I turned the cards over. Most of the backs were blank. Some had a word or two, a temperature, once a note that said generator. One of them, from a Tuesday in February 2 winters back, had a full sentence on the back in my mother's hand, small and square and unhurried. Phone tree if silent. The letter and the number came to me the next morning while I was rinsing a cup, which is where things come to me. Bin locations. That's all it was. For 26 years I'd worked a system where a letter told you the aisle and a number told you how far down it you walked. My mother hadn't invented a code. She'd built an index, and she'd built it the way any practical person builds one, out of the 2 things about a house that never change. The road, and how far out on it you are. The County Road Commission puts its plow routes on a public map. I pulled it up and started matching. B4, Bissell Creek Road, and at the 4th mile there is exactly 1 driveway. K2, 2 miles up Kelso. T9, out past where the pavement quits on Taylor Creek, 9 miles from the garage where the plows are kept. 11 marks. 11 driveways. Not a club. Not friends. Houses, listed in the order a plow truck would reach them, and my mother had been marking each one off, one at a time, every Tuesday at 7:10 for 6 winters, and circling the ones on days the roads shut. She never wrote a single name. I want to be fair to myself here, because I got a great deal wrong in those weeks. This part I got right, sitting in my car outside her house with a plow map open on my phone and the heater going. A woman does not build a list without names by accident either. She'd built it so that if anybody found it, it wouldn't tell them anything. The club had a contact address on a website that looked like it hadn't been touched since 2011. I wrote 3 sentences, sent them at 9 at night, and had an answer before I finished the dishes. Ruth Ann Mackey had been the club secretary for 19 years. She lived in Harvey in a ranch house, with a wheelchair ramp built onto the side of it, and a card table in the front window covered in radio parts that belonged to her late husband. She poured coffee before I got my coat off and put a plate of cardamom bread in front of me that I did not ask for and finished anyway. "You're the older one," she said. "Grace talked about you." I let that sit there. I wasn't sure yet whether it was a kindness. I put 4 cards on her table. She looked at them for a while without touching them, the way you'd look at somebody's mail that had come to your house by mistake. "You know what these are," I said. "I know what they are." "Then I'd like you to tell me, because I've got a man named Walt calling me about a signal, and I don't know what I'm sitting on." She got up and came back with a black minute book, and she did not open it. "It's a winter check-in," she said. "That's the whole thing. It isn't a secret, and it isn't a club activity exactly. It's people out on roads that don't get plowed until 9 in the morning saying, 'Once a week, I'm here, I'm warm, I've got food.' 11 households," she said. Some of them had licensed operators in them and some didn't. The ones who didn't had a neighbor who'd relay, or a phone in the kitchen and a list on the wall. Somebody called the roll every Tuesday at 7:10 on the club's repeater. Every household answered in order, and if a household didn't answer, the person running the net worked down a phone tree, and if the phone tree came up empty, somebody with a truck and a plow blade went and looked. "How often does anybody actually go look?" "Twice a winter," Ruth Ann said. "Some winters 4. She said nobody's name appeared on any club paper by design, and that the design was my mother's. Grace had told the club, more than once, that people out here would rather freeze than be on a list of people who might need help, and that if you want a proud man to say yes to a check-in, you'd better make sure his name never shows up in a binder in somebody's garage. I had spent 3 days building a case that this was a code. It was a code. It was a code to protect the dignity of 11 people who had to be talked into being cared about. "How do you even ask somebody?" I said. "How does that conversation go?" Ruth Ann laughed. "One note, no humor in it. You don't ask. You mention it at the transfer station like it's a nuisance you got roped into. You say, 'We've got this fool thing on Tuesdays. Would you keep an ear on so-and-so for me? He's stubborn.'" She turned her cup a quarter turn on the table. "Then he's not the one being checked on. He's the one doing a favor. 9 times out of 10, that's the only version a man out here will sign. I have run inventory audits on people who would rather lie to me than admit a shelf came up short, and I understood exactly what she had just described, and I had never once thought to apply it to my mother." "She ran it every Tuesday?" I asked. "Since it started." "Since when?" Ruth Ann put her hand flat on the minute book, and she said, That's a longer story than you want tonight. I let her have that. I've thought about it since. If she'd told me then, I'd have used it as a weapon inside of an hour. What she did tell me, walking me out to my car with her cardigan pulled shut against the wind coming off the lake, was the thing that took the floor out from under me. You know, she said, toward the end there, it wasn't Grace calling the roll. I stopped with my hand on the door. Same station, Ruth Ann said. Same time. Not her voice. North Shore Community College is a public institution, which means their records are not a favor. I asked for the intake packet on the donation in writing, and I had it as a PDF in 2 days. It came back in 2 days as an attachment, 3 pages long, and it told me more about my sister than the last 4 years had. Intake stamp, 16th of October, 9:40 in the morning, 11 days after we buried our mother. My sister had taken a personal day from the bus garage, loaded a transceiver, a power supply, a speaker, a microphone, a coil of feed line, and 2 sketches of an antenna into her truck, driven 40 minutes, and signed a form. Page 2 was a property description with a value on it. $2,400 appraised, which meant $1,200 of it was mine. Page 3 had a box for institutional use, and somebody in the electronics program had checked a line that said stored channel memory to be cleared prior to student assignment and written a date beside it. Thursday. I read that page 4 times before I understood I had 48 hours to save whatever my mother had programmed into that radio, and no standing yet to stop a college from following its own written policy. Then I did the thing I had been circling for a week and hadn't let myself do. The license database is public. I typed my sister's name, Dana Chen, of Marquette County, Michigan. Technician class in February. Upgraded in May. Call sign issued. Current. In good standing. February. 8 months before our mother died. I sat with that. I'm not going to pretend I sat with it graciously. My sister had gone and gotten herself a radio license 8 months before the woman who owned the radio died, and neither of them had mentioned it to me, and 11 days after the funeral the radio was gone. I could feel a story assembling itself in my head, clean and complete, the way a wrong count assembles itself when you're tired. The thing that stopped me, barely, was that a person planning to take a $2,400 radio does not give it away to a community college. The bottom drawer had a spiral notebook in it that I'd set aside on the first day because it looked like a grocery list. It was the net log. Date, time on, time off, and a line at the top of every entry that said net control, followed by a set of initials. For 6 winters. Every Tuesday. The same 2 letters. GC. Then, starting with a Tuesday in April, in my mother's own handwriting, the initials changed. DC. She'd written it herself, 60-some times, in a hand that was getting worse, and on the 4th of those entries, she'd added 1 word in the margin that I read as a compliment and a surrender at the same time. Steady. The bus garage smells like diesel and floor dry, and it hasn't changed since we were girls, and our father worked out of a shop just like it. Dana came out at 4 with her hair up under a knit cap, and grease worked into the creases of her knuckles, and she stopped 10 feet from me because she saw the folder. You could have called, she said. I did call. Twice. I know. I asked her, straight out, standing in a parking lot in a cold wind, whether she had been running our mother's Tuesday net. She didn't stall. I'll give her that. And it cost me something to give her that. Since April, she said. Her hands were done, Maya. She couldn't work the knob. She'd land on the frequency and then push right past it, and she'd sit there and cuss at a knob. Dana looked out at the buses. First time I did it, she stood behind my chair with her hand on my shoulder the whole hour. And nobody thought to tell me. Tell you what? You called it her little hobby at Thanksgiving. Twice. That landed the way true things land. I asked her for the names. The 11. No. Dana, there are people out on those roads with nobody calling them, and it's going to snow. You think I don't know that? Her voice came up for the first time. Those people said yes to Mom. They didn't say yes to you, and they sure didn't say yes to a stranger with a clipboard showing up in their driveway asking how they're heating the place. Half of them wouldn't have signed on at all if she hadn't promised no names on paper. Then why is the radio at a college? Because she asked me to move it. I asked when. August. Show me where she wrote that. Dana stood there and let the wind go through her jacket and said, she told me. There it was. Every piece of it. And not 1 page. I told her that estate property doesn't move on a conversation. I told her a form with the word non-operational on it, signed by an heir, describing a radio that 11 people had heard working 3 weeks earlier, is a document I would have written somebody up for at work. I told her that if she'd said one sentence to me in October, we wouldn't be standing in a parking lot. She took it. All of it. Dana has always taken the first round and then swung once at the end. "You want to know why I didn't call you?" she said when I'd run out. "Because I know how it goes." I say, "Mom wants the radio moved." You say, "Where's that in writing?" I say, "She told me in August." You say, "Then we'll deal with it after probate, and probate is 9 months, and 9 months is April." She pulled her cap off and pushed her hair back with her wrist, the way you do when your hands are dirty. One of us would have been right and it wouldn't have mattered, because it'd be spring, and it'd be over, and there wouldn't be anything left to hand anybody. You could have tried. I've tried before. That was the piece I couldn't argue with, so I argued with the paperwork instead, which is the same move she'd made in the other direction, and neither of us noticed it at the time. She swung when I got to my car. "You keep saying she cut you out," Dana said. "She gave you a job too, Maya. Years ago. You never once asked what it was. I did everything right and it didn't matter." Which is a sentence I'd like to be less familiar with. Wednesday morning I drove to the courthouse, then to my mother's bank, then home, and by 2 in the afternoon I had a written objection to the transfer of estate property signed by one of the 2 personal representatives, and I emailed it to the college property office with the intake number in the subject line. I asked them, in the plainest language I know, to place an administrative hold on the unit and to leave the stored channel memory alone until the estate resolved the question of ownership. Del Hallinan replied at 4:20. He said he'd forward it to the program. Friday morning I called to confirm the hold, and a woman in the electronics program was very kind to me for about 6 minutes. The bench check had run Thursday at 8. Standard intake procedure on a donated transceiver. Bench test, power supply check, alignment if it needs it, and then you clear the memories, because the college is not in the business of handing students a radio full of somebody's private channel list. My objection had gone into an inbox on Wednesday afternoon and been read Friday, because the property office is one man and he takes Thursdays off. Everything my mother had programmed into that radio was gone. The frequency, the tone, whatever she'd named the memory slots, which is a thing operators do, and which I had been picturing for 4 days, as a column of 11 labels that would tell me exactly who I was looking for. I overstated that loss to myself for about 2 days. I hadn't lost the network. I'd lost the shortcut, which is a different thing, and losing a shortcut has never yet killed anybody. I asked Ruth Ann for the roster that afternoon. I didn't ask nicely. She said no, and she didn't soften it. The households had consented to a check-in, not to disclosure, and the club had exactly one thing to offer people who did not want to be on anybody's list, which was that they were not on anybody's list. "I'll carry a message," she said. "That's what I can do. You write it, I'll read it to every one of them, and if they want to talk to you, they'll call you. And if they don't, then they don't, Maya." I said something to her then that I'd take back if I could. I said that a rule protecting people from a phone call was going to look pretty thin from the inside of a cold house. She didn't get angry. She said, "It might. And it's still their rule and not yours," and she said it the way you'd tell somebody the stove is hot, and she was right on both halves of it. I sat in my car outside her house for a while. It had gone dark at 5:30, the way it does up here in November, and the wind had swung around to the northwest, which is the direction that means business. Somewhere, out on 11 roads, there were people who had answered a radio every Tuesday for 6 years and had heard nothing for a month, and the only 2 people who knew who they were had both told me no, and one of them was my sister, and the other one was right. I went back to the house because I had nowhere else to go with it. There was a second binder on the closet shelf, behind the QSL cards. Gray, 3-ring, the cheap kind with the plastic peeling at the corner. I'd flipped it open on the first day, seen a page of repeater frequencies, and set it down. It had tab dividers. Somebody had typed the tabs on a machine, which told you how long they'd been there. Repeater, antenna, power, net, and a 4th one, further back. That just said Storm 2014. The net tab held 9 pages, and the 3rd one stopped me. It was a single sheet of ruled paper, the kind out of a school notebook, and my mother had drawn it with a straight edge. 3 columns ruled by hand, the lines wobbling a little where her hand had. Across the top she'd written the date, April 4th. The left column said Tuesdays, and under it 2 lines. GC through March 28th. DC from April 4th. The middle column said backup, and it had 2 rows, relay, and a call sign that wasn't Dana's. Then, under it, supply, and 1 letter, M. The right column said equipment, and it had 4 short lines in it that I read maybe 30 times that night. Before snow. NSCC. Tower, generator, someone trained on site. Not the house. Not the house. My mother had written it out in April, 6 months before she died, with a ruler, on a piece of school paper, and then she had put it in a binder on a closet shelf and told my sister out loud and told me nothing, and both of those women had assumed that was fine. The college had the rest of it. I asked for the correspondence file the same way I'd asked for the intake packet, and it came back with an email chain in it. The 12th of September. 3 weeks before our mother died, while she was still in her chair in the front room with the oxygen concentrator running. My sister had written to the instructor who runs the electronics program at North Shore, and she had not asked whether the college wanted a free radio. She'd asked whether a donated station could keep hosting a weekly community net on a fixed schedule on the college's tower, with a licensed operator at the control point if the family transferred the equipment. The instructor had written back the next day and said yes and asked when. Dana hadn't answered him for a month. She answered him on the 14th of October, 2 days before she drove the radio out there, and what she wrote was 4 words long. We can do it now. I sat in my mother's kitchen with a printout in my hand and did the arithmetic I should have done a week earlier. My sister had not taken the radio. She'd moved it to the one place within 40 miles that had a tower on a hill, a generator that comes on by itself when the power drops, and a room with people in it who know how to fix a transceiver. She'd done it 11 days after the funeral because the first lake effect event of the season usually shows up in the 3rd week of November, and because our mother had written before snow on a piece of school paper in April, and she had done it without a signature, without an inventory, without telling the other heir, and she had written non-operational on a form for a radio that worked, because the fastest way to hand over an old man's dignity to a college property office is to say the thing is broken and let them stop asking questions about it. She'd been right about the network and wrong about everything else, and she'd been wrong in the exact way she has been wrong since she was 9 years old, which is alone. That still left the tab at the back of the binder. Storm 2014 held 22 pages, and the top one was a photocopy of a page of club minutes with a coffee ring on it. Somebody had underlined one line in pencil, and the pencil was my mother's, and the line said this: Grace first house reached. It took me 2 days to put February of 2014 back together, and I did it the way I'd have reconstructed a shrink count, which is to say from 4 sources that don't know about each other. The weather archive first. A blizzard warning issued on a Sunday afternoon, upgraded Sunday night. Sustained winds over 35, gusts near 60, 29 inches at the airport, and considerably more inland where nobody measures. Power out to about 11,000 customers in the county. Restoration on the rural circuits took 2 days. Then the road commission. Their closure log is public if you ask for it, and I asked. 11 miles of the North Shore Road closed Sunday at 7 in the evening. Barricades at both ends. Reopened Tuesday morning at 6. Then a receipt. Bottom of the same gray binder, in a sleeve, because my mother kept every receipt she ever generated. A furnace control board, parts and labor, invoiced the Thursday after that storm. In the technician's notes, 6 words. Unit failed on high limit lockout. Her furnace quit sometime Sunday night in a house with the wind at 60, and no power and a road closed at both ends. And then the 4th source, which was me. I was in Marquette, 22 miles away. I had a trunk with a case of water in it, a bag of groceries, and one of those little ceramic space heaters that would have done her about as much good as a candle, and I sat in my car at a barricade on the North Shore Road on Monday morning, with the heater still in the box, and I called her landline 40 times and got nothing, because the line was down, and I called her cell and got nothing, because she was 82 in 2014 and left it in a drawer. I called the sheriff's department at 8, and again at 10 and again at noon. The dispatcher was patient with me every time. Around 2 in the afternoon, somebody called me back and told me Grace Chen was fine. She was warm. They had her. I said thank you and I drove home and I did not ask who they was. I have gone over that phone call a lot this past year. There was no reason on earth I couldn't have asked one more question. I was relieved, And relief is the most efficient way I know to stop being curious. I saw her the following Saturday. She had a pot of soup on and she made a joke about the furnace man's truck getting stuck in her own driveway, and she asked me about my knee, and I told her about a recall we were working through at the pharmacy, and at no point in 2.5 hours did either of us say the word Sunday. I have thought about what I would have had to do to get the rest of it out of her. Not much. Sit down. Ask a second question. Say, "Who got you out?" and let the quiet go on long enough that she had to fill it. I didn't, because she was warm and the road was open and I had a shift on Monday, and because a daughter who asks that question has to hear the answer, and the answer was that 11 people she'd waved at from her mailbox for 30 years had come and found her sitting in a parka in front of an open oven. 14 hours. That's what the minutes say. From the time the power went out on that circuit to the time somebody got through her door, and for the last stretch of it, she had a house at 39 degrees, and she was sitting in the front room in her parka with a wool blanket over her legs and the oven door open, which is a thing that kills people every winter in this county, and which she absolutely knew better than to do. The last page under the tab was a list, not a code. Names, addresses, phone numbers, handwritten, 11 households on 11 roads, and at the bottom a single sentence and 11 signatures under it, some in pen, one in what looks like a carpenter's pencil. The date was the 8th of March, 2014. The paralegal at the firm handling the estate is a woman named Beth Sundquist who has explained probate to grieving people for 20 years and has gotten very good at not looking impressed by anything. She read the intake packet. She read my mother's ruled page. She put both down. "The transfer's defective," she said. "Estate property, 2 personal representatives, 1 signature. The college accepted it in good faith, and they'll give it back the day you ask. Write the letter and I'll file it." I asked what would happen after that. "It comes back into the estate at the appraised value, $2,400. You and your sister split it, or one of you buys the other out, or you sell it and split the money." "How long?" "Letter this week, they'll release it inside of 10 days. It's not a fight. They don't want it if there's a question. 10 days. I did that math in her parking lot, sitting in a cold car with the engine running. The house was under a purchase agreement, closing in January, because neither of us could carry it, and both of us knew it. My mother's antenna was a mast on the garage peak, and 70 feet of wire strung to a white pine, on a lot that would belong to a family from Green Bay in 6 weeks. If the radio came back into the estate, it came back to my garage in town, where there is no tower, no generator, and nothing higher than a rain gutter to hang a wire from. On a good night I might have gotten out 10 miles. Bissell Creek is 19. Taylor Creek, past where the pavement quits, is closer to 26. The extended forecast had a system coming down out of Canada and setting up over the lake in about 12 days. So the choice was not the one I'd been telling myself I had. I'd been carrying it around as ownership against sentiment, my half of a radio against a hobby my sister liked, and that was flattering to me and it was false. The actual choice was this. I could be correct, and 11 households on 11 roads would go into the first real storm of the winter with nobody calling the roll. Or I could sign away $1,200 and the last room in the world that still looked like my mother, and be correct about the part that mattered, which was the paperwork, and let go of the part that didn't, which was the box. I want to say I got there in an hour. It took 4 days, and one of them I spent sitting on the floor of that empty room with my back against the desk. What I finally understood was small, and it wasn't noble. The radio was not my mother. My mother was a woman who ruled 3 columns on school paper with a straight edge because her hands wouldn't do freehand anymore. If I hauled the equipment into my garage and kept it, I'd have the object, and I'd have ended the thing the object was for, and I'd have done it while telling myself I was preserving her. So I called Beth back and told her to draft something else. An amended inventory that put the transceiver, the power supply, the speaker, the microphone, and the feed line into the estate at $2,400, where they should have been listed on the 16th of October. A written acknowledgement from Dana that she had transferred estate property without authority and that the value came off her side of the accounting. A joint donation agreement, signed by both heirs, transferring the equipment to North Shore Community College with 2 conditions written into it. The station stays available for the Tuesday net, and no participant list lives on any college machine. And a consent form. 1 page, plain language, for each household. Their name stays with the club. Their name never goes on a college record, an estate record, or in front of me. That last one cost me something too, and I don't think anybody noticed but me. I had the 11 names. They'd been sitting in my mother's binder since the 8th of March, 2014, in pen and in carpenter's pencil, with the phone numbers written out beside them. I could have started calling that afternoon and told myself I was doing it for their own good. I put the page in an envelope and drove it out to Ruth Ann and let her make the calls, because a signature from 2014 is a promise those people made to each other and not a permission slip they handed to a stranger 12 years later. She checked it against her own list and told me 9 of the 11 households were still the same people. She did not tell me which 9. Beth had it all drawn in 3 days. Dana signed the acknowledgement in the parking lot of the bus garage without reading past the first paragraph, which is either trust or exhaustion, and I have decided not to decide which. I drove out to the college on a Thursday with a folder on the passenger seat and 40 inches of snow in the 10-day forecast. Ruth Ann brought the minute book out to her kitchen table on the last night of November, and this time she opened it. March 8, 2014. Special meeting, 16 present, held in the basement of the Lutheran Church on Fair Avenue because the club's usual room still had no power. The motion was made by Walter Radio. The minutes recorded in the flat, decent language of a man who did not want to make a speech. We were 14 hours late to Grace Chen's house. Moved that the undersigned households establish a fixed weekly check-in by radio and telephone, roads in order out from the garage, so that nobody waits 14 hours again. Under it, the sentence I'd seen on the last page of the binder, and the 11 signatures. And then the line my mother had underlined in pencil, in the secretary's summary of who had been reached and when. Grace first house reached. I had that backwards for 6 weeks, and it had never occurred to me that it could go the other way. I'd been reading it as an inventory line. First house reached, meaning she got there first, meaning she was the one out in it, the one with the truck and the list, the coordinator doing what coordinators do. She wasn't. In March of 2014, my mother was 70 years old and she did not own a radio. She was the house they got to. She's the reason there's a rotation at all. Ruth Ann turned 2 more pages and showed me the roster from the following year, and there was Grace Chen with a brand new technician license at 71, and beside it a note about a vanity call sign application, because when my father died, his call sign went back into the pool and she had waited and then taken it. Whiskey 8 Quebec Romeo Delta. His letters. Her voice on them for 6 winters. She wouldn't take the coordinator job the first year, Ruth Ann said. Second year she took it, and never gave it up. She's the one who made the codes. She's the one who put the phone tree in for the houses with no license. She's the one who started the cards, because she said if you don't write it down you'll tell yourself you called everybody. I asked why nobody had ever told me any of it. Ruth Ann looked at me over her glasses for a second longer than was comfortable. Because she was ashamed, she said, of the 14 hours, of the oven door. That's not a thing you put in the Christmas letter, Maya. She'd have told it as a joke about the furnace and stopped there. Ruth Ann read my letter to all 11 households over 9 days, on the phone, in her own kitchen voice. She did not read them my name until the end of it. 9 came back signed inside a week. 2 took longer, and one of those called me himself on a Sunday and talked for 40 minutes about a bear. 11 of 11, on paper, by the 9th of December. The storm was 2 days out. Ruth Ann called the college. The college called Dana. Dana called me, which she had not done since April, and said the net would run Tuesday at 7:10, and asked, in a voice she does not use very often, whether I was planning to come. The radio room at North Shore is on the 2nd floor at the end of a hallway that smells like floor wax and solder, and it has a window that faces north, which on that Tuesday meant it faced a wall of gray coming across the lake, with the light going out of it. Dana sat at the control point because Dana holds the license. I sat at her left with a clipboard, which is where I have always been most useful. At 7:06 she brought the power supply up, and the meter needles swung and settled. At 10 past she keyed the microphone and read the roll in the order. 11 households had agreed on in the basement of a church 12 years ago, roads out from the garage nearest first. B4 answered. A woman's voice. Flat, unhurried, no wasted words. Clear, full propane, plowed out. K2, T9, R6. Some of them came in on their own radios. Some came through a neighbor relaying, which is a thing that sounds clumsy on paper and takes about 4 seconds in practice. Number 9 on the list was a phone call I made from the corner of that room while Dana held the frequency, and the man who answered said he'd been standing next to the phone. Walt Radio was 10th. He said it was good to hear the Tuesday signal again, and then he asked on the air who was on supply this winter. Dana keyed the microphone and held it toward me and stayed where she was, because the licensed operator has to stay at the control point, and I said my piece into my sister's microphone. I told them supply backup meant a phone list that doesn't live in a phone, printed on paper, in a truck. It meant knowing which house has propane and which has fuel oil, and how many days each of them has left when a road closes. And it meant the part I actually know how to do, which is that I keep a list of what people take and when they run out, so that on the 4th day of a closure, somebody knows there's a man on Taylor Creek who is 2 days from the end of a blood pressure prescription, and that this is a bigger emergency than the driveway. I spent 26 years counting shelves so that a pharmacy never told somebody to come back Thursday. It turns out my mother knew what that was worth in a county like this one, and she wrote it on a piece of school paper in April, and I found out about it in November. We did not fix anything between us that night. Dana and I have 30 years of getting each other wrong, and neither of us is built to hand it over in one evening. What we did was divide the work. She runs the radio, and she is better at it than our mother was at the end. I keep the phone tree, the supply list, and the calendar, and I am better at that than she will ever be, and both of those sentences are just true, and neither one of them is an apology. If there's somebody in your life at the end of a long road, find out who checks on them before the weather does. That's the whole thing I've got. If a story like this is worth your evening, stay with me for the next one. The 11th household answered at 22 minutes past 7. Snow had started against the north window, going sideways. The logbook was new, a green county ledger, first page, first line. I wrote the date and the time, and then I wrote what my mother wrote 60 times a winter for 6 winters in a room that doesn't exist anymore. 11 of 11 clear. Dana let go of the key, and the little red transmit light on the front of that radio went dark, and the room got quiet, and outside it kept snowing on 11 roads with everybody accounted for.